Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Gordeau, and I'm with AMGC. Welcome to AMGC's webinar series, 10 Ways to Succeed in Australian Manufacturing. Today is focused on way number 2, which is on leadership. We will now pass you over to our host, Michael Sharp, National Director for Industry. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Good to be back here again with some great speakers today. So our second week into the 10 Ways report, and today on leadership. I'd like to start by acknowledging country. So we do acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And today I'm coming from Darkinjung country on the central coast, just north of Sydney. Very big into food production. You've got the likes here of Sara Lee and Sanitarium and Master Foods, amongst a range of others. So good to be here on the Central Coast today and coming to you all around Australia. I'd like to also welcome my colleagues who I know are tuning in the various states, and glad you could all join us. So, as Kelly mentioned, we're talking about the second way today. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Katie O'Connell, who's our Director for Research, who's put significant work into this latest research publication. And I'm sure you'll all agree, it's quite a piece of work. And I know a lot of you engage with Katie around the country on some of these meetings to get your feedback and to add to the research. Firstly, I'd like to just go through our speakers today and welcome my colleague, Darren Norman, who's Industry Facilitator at AMGC. And Darren's, you'll see all of their bios in the invitation that you've registered with us today. But Darren's had a distinguished career in the Australian Army and is a retired brigadier. And I'll come to Darren shortly around some of his experience in that field and in much broader experience as well. Secondly, Garry Beard, who's also been the chairman of Family Business Australia, but his family business has been around for 120 years. A.H Beard, who many of you will know, make a range of mattresses and beds, and we'll get stuck into that very shortly as well. But welcome, Garry. And finally, Priscilla Rogers, who's the co-founder of a company called DOFTEK. Priscilla's currently in lockdown in Victoria with, I know my colleague Mike Grogan, we talked about that last week. Certainly, we're never going to forget 2020. But Priscilla's had a great career with corporate companies like IBM, and now with her startup company, DOFTEK. So we'll get to that very shortly. Firstly, some housekeeping. Just to remind everyone that today's webinar is being recorded. Please submit any questions as we go through this. Put your questions up via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to go for 1 hour and finish at 1 o'clock. And happy to follow up with any questions after that time as well. So feel free to reach out and join me on LinkedIn, and happy to help at any time. Just a bit of a snapshot around the report, just to update you all that we did reach out to more than 30 focus groups. We had roundtable discussions and interviews conducted all over the country. We had 93 individuals from manufacturing companies, industry bodies, government agencies and universities. The industry bodies represent approximately 370 manufacturers across the country. We also had a survey of 1,000 members of the Australian public and a survey of 1,000 students and focus groups. So I'm sure you'll agree it was significant engagement, which has led to what I consider an outstanding report. So just at a glance, way 2, the second way in our publication, is around leadership. And good leadership is needed to ensure changes stick and underpin all the ways towards an advanced manufacturing future. Leadership is needed whether you're the business owner, the CEO or a manager within a larger organisation. And leadership is a skill that can be learned, and you can take practical steps to become a more effective leader. Now today I have got the report here in my hand, but you can download it from our website at amgc.org.au. But Priscilla, I thought I might come to you first because, wow, what a time to be in a startup business. DOFTEK, you're doing great things. I know we've got an AMGC project going with your business right now. You might want to touch on collaboration, because one of the outcomes of the leadership thing is about engaging in collaboration. So we know that that's a key driver for manufacturing, but you've got a whole range of experience from the corporate world as well with IBM. But I thought maybe we just start with the experience of the lockdown and how that's impacting your business, which is still in the startup mode. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a pleasure to be able to speak to you all today. It's a little bit nerve-wracking seeing the numbers go up for participants, but it's great to be here. And I am joining you from my home. So DOFTEK is an innovation company, and I think, not dissimilar to many of your organisations, we have been particularly challenged by COVID. Innovation is not just about technology, it's actually also about innovation in business models, in commercialisation, and really, any area that we need to focus on. So I think as a business, while we would consider ourselves leaders in wheel alignment and in the automotive sector, certainly we've had to focus on working with collaborators and strategic partners to ensure that we've been able to continue to grow throughout this time. We did have a very fruitful relationship with AMGC. I think, partnerships are incredibly important to innovation. AMGC has really allowed us to scale ourselves as a very small team. If you happen to Google us, you might see that we did have a press launch during this time, but only to say that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for our partnership with AMGC. So I would absolutely support that external networks and collaborators are important to innovation as well.
But maybe just to pin it, get into that a bit, Priscilla, around the leadership side, it must be completely different for you to come from the corporate world and these global companies to a startup nature. What sort of things have you had to adjust to? How did you transition your leadership, or what comments would you have around that experience?
Yeah, for sure. When we think about leadership, we're a small company, so we think about leadership in the context of the industry and being leaders within the automotive sector. Like you mentioned, we are non-traditional automotive people. So for us, leadership looks like, being bold enough, having enough self-belief that we from the healthcare sector can do innovative things and solve problems that have been around for decades. I think it's partly also being able to be agile and entrepreneurial during this time. Speed is probably our greatest asset, and then just a willingness to take the risks. We were very excited at the start of the year, had many commercial leads, but obviously when COVID hit, the automotive sector has suffered, 20 to 30% drops in revenue. For us, we had to make the strategic decision to double down on innovation, to not stop, but continue to spend. For us, we would live or die by that. So I think, whilst it is tough times, now is the time actually to continue to innovate, so that when we do come out of lockdown, hopefully sooner rather than later, we can pick back up our commercial relationships.
Yeah, what a time to be in automotive in Victoria, in lockdown because of COVID. I guess export needs to be a focus for your business, and I know that's something you're looking at and engaging with. I'm going to ask you about where you get inspiration from for leadership. Is there someone you turn to on, someone you follow on Twitter perhaps, or a good book that you've maybe reread over the years? Is there something online or a podcast? What encouragement do you get from listening or engaging with others?
I think we're continually inspired by companies, both corporately and in the startup world, who continue to invest in innovation. Like you mentioned earlier, I did spend some time in IBM, and it sounds like Garry from his company will talk about, the innovation that I'm sure he's had to do over the past 100 years to remain a leader in the sector. So we look for examples both in the corporate world and new companies that are coming up in the marketplace. In terms of books and authors, I'm inspired by a gentleman by the name of Bill Fisher, Charles Fine. There is an MIT innovation program where these guys are leaders in it, Duncan Symester. But otherwise, meetups are a great place to meet with other companies who can share their innovation stories and give you ideas around, possible avenues that you might like to explore.
I truly agree with that. I mean, we started with collaboration, but being able to meet up with other business leaders and people in the industry to learn from each other, and certainly now to support each other, I think it's so beneficial, and I couldn't agree more with you. Thanks for that, Priscilla. That's great. But Garry, over to you. I mean, what a time. Early on, I was able to ring you and talk to you about assisting us with an emergency hospital bed project. So we had a firm from the United States engage with us and needed to build a local supply chain to build emergency hospital beds. And this is in the early weeks of March. But you were able to respond, like within hours, we had things going, didn't we? But as far as the collaboration part, this is not new to your business. So 120 years, I think the A.H Beard business has been going. So compared to Priscilla, it's nearly 3 years in startup mode. It is a different scenario, but you've got some experience there around leadership. I'm sure you'll touch on some of the things with family business, but this is not the first time that A.H Beard has been able to help the nation in a time of crisis. I think you mentioned to me about your father and grandfather in previous times of crisis in Australia. Did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, Michael, again, thank you for the opportunity. That story was during the Depression, and that our grandfather, and back then all the beds in the hospitals were full of horsehair. And the main reason was that you could actually pull it to pieces and boil it and sanitize it. So our grandfather was very lucky to get the contract for the major hospitals in Sydney, of actually going around, picking up the beds, taking them back to the factory, unstitching them, destroying the cover, boiling the hair and returning the hair to get the spring in it, and then putting it back together. And on top of that, for those, if you ever come to our factory, we've got a 1935 Oldsmobile downstairs, and that was the time when there was a shortage of electricity. So in the morning they take the wheels off it, and Pop had organised a generator, so they put the generator, hooked the build up to the truck, and run the power for the factory because of the brownouts or the blackouts of the time. Put the wheels back on in the afternoon and go and deliver what they made in the day. So again, you made the best of what was available at the time, and that's back in the days when beds were made by hand, hand stitched by hand, and so that's how great-grandfather, or that's how Pop himself actually got into the bedding game. He was an upholsterer by trade, and a guy actually bet him to make 7 beds in a week. So he got a loan from his father of a half a gold sovereign, and got collateral from the bank to buy the ticking and the stuffing inside the bed, which was probably kapok or straw back in those days. And great-grandmother actually stitched the cover together, and it looks like a sausage, and then it's stitched down to look like a mattress. So yeah, from 7 beds to 10,000 beds today, it's certainly been a journey of innovation.
So you've got operations all around the country. I know that because that was significant in being able to supply during the crisis if we needed to shut down various states, and we've seen that happen now. But in those early weeks, we flagged that could be a possibility, and your national footprint was important to us. So that's been really good. But there's a lot to unpack there, I guess, Garry, around family business and transition of management over time. We know, many of the small to medium companies across Australia are family business. So what does leadership look like as far as through the generations, and how have you been able to deal with that?
Yeah, if I may, Michael, just going back to that striker exercise of the hospital bed, it really did show whereby Aussie manufacturers ourselves making the mattress, a guy around the corner here at Revesby making the actual metal frame, and that within 1 week of Michael ringing and saying, is it possible to do this? We had a prototype that met the international standards that the hospitals required. So collaboration on that part was absolutely fantastic. Our team, our operations team, midnight calls through to America to make sure everything was right. So it certainly worked. But family-wise, I have the benefit of being the 4th generation in the game. My brother's still active in the business. We've been through our trials and tribulations, but the learnings, I think, more than anything, when you go from first, second, third, fourth, now we're into the fifth generation, of which we have 3 of the fifth generation working in the business, and we have our test pilots in the 6th generation trying out our new inventions. But it is very family. But again, factories, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Hobart, of all places, and also over in Auckland. But that was an initiative we took back in late 80s, whereby I was a member of the actual furniture guild at the time, and sitting around the table, for those who remember names like Parker and Chiswell and Van Tray, who were excellent craftsmen, and Jackson Furniture, and the threat of the Chinese back then. And they had lead times of 12 to 15 weeks, and they had the belief as a family that because they were 3rd generation and the craftsmanship, it would carry them through. And today, not one of those companies are around, whereas I took the attitude of learning from the Japanese and then the Americans of just in time, that we transformed the business in the late 80s, early 90s into a just in time, whereby, as an example, if you went to buy a bed in Moore Park in Sydney on the weekend on Sunday, the actual mattress would be on the dock by Wednesday, made from scratch, not made, all made to order. And that in turn led to us having factories across the whole of Australia to provide that delivery service, and the company built itself around that. Pop was the instigator of starting them. My father joined after the Second World War. Dad was the first one to get involved with Travelodge and Koala Hotels, those who remember when they first started off, and we were very strong as a house brand, supplying David Jones and supplying Waltons, Norman Ross, probably names that retailers don't know of anymore, but we didn't have an actual brand name. Another part of the innovator is bringing the A.H Beard back to the forefront with a lot of underneath the umbrella of different names. And now in the last, 7-year journey, we now sell beds to China, of amazing, selling ice to Eskimos, but it certainly does work. And it's really on the basis that we have more faith in growing. We've been members of Australian Made since 1987. We have built our business around being Australian made and Australian jobs. That we hear now under COVID that we have people asking about Australian made, which it hasn't happened so much in the past.
There's one thing for sure, more and more people are talking about manufacturing now, Garry, and that's a great thing. And we've got the Prime Minister speaking at the National Press Club tomorrow around manufacturing in particular. So I know I'm certainly looking forward to hearing the vision from the federal government tomorrow. So we're certainly looking forward to that. I don't think the values would have changed over that time in leadership though, Garry. You know, it's one of the other findings of our report is around leading by example. So I'm sure you've touched on some of those stories, but the values in leadership are so important too, don't you think?
Mate, very much so. And we've adopted since the early 90s, again, a vision process whereby we get together with our key leadership people, but people from the floor through to the dock, to sit and discuss what we see the future looks like. And it's really from a lot of those, the innovation came, that what they saw, what we could be. As an example, when we had one factory in Park Road, Sans Souci in Sydney, and they drew a picture in the vision of factories all around Australia. And they also drew in the vision the Harbour Bridge going to Asia. And it only took 7 years for that to become a reality of 7 factories and us exporting to the world. So leadership through our people as with our people. Another thing we do have is a small card, like a business card, and we give it to everybody. It's our values of integrity, tradition, mutual respect, and profitable growth. So they understand, and that our vision is to improve people's lives through better sleep. We communicate that on a daily basis. We've just gone through, we have the board, then we have an executive team, then we have a leadership team. The executive team, CEO, CFO, operations, marketing, the board consisting of brother and myself, the CEO, the CFO, one of our nieces who had done all her training with IBM and Singtel on a marketing level. Structure was very important to grow this business from a $3 million business to $150 million, and the growing pains with it. But one of the failings that private businesses or family businesses that I see is that we don't devote enough attention to training our people. We allow them to come through the business, and their skills get them through the business, but the adjusting and keeping up with the momentum that is created. And we have started in the last 3 years an additional education for our key people to understand really what is needed to take this business forward. And
I think that's really important, Garry, and we will be touching on skills later in the report. Certainly that's going to be a big driver for transitioning manufacturing in Australia. So I might cross to Darren around that, because as Garry's suggesting, the skills and the learning are all important, and no more so than in leadership, which, one of the key findings in our 10 Ways report is around to keep learning, learn more, but also leading by example, Darren. So I'm sure you've got some great examples around your experience in the Army, but also you've been appointed to run disaster zones and cleanups, like at the Central Coast where the floods came through. So you were in command of that cleanup operation. Maybe you want to touch on some of that and your experience around leading by example, perhaps.
Thanks, Michael. And I guess the first point I'd say is just on your point about learning. That's one of the key principles of leadership is you need to always be learning, continue to learn. And it's not only through structured training and so on, but learn from your experience. Leaders are humans, and humans make mistakes. The difference is whether you learn from that mistake or not, and leaders tend to learn from their mistakes. Hopefully, you always hope that your mistakes aren't going to have too big of an impact on the people that you're leading, but sometimes they will, and what those people will look to you for is some sort of indication that you've learned from it and that you've adjusted the way that you're going about what you're doing. So big advocate for continuing to learn as you go, but on the point of leading by example, I mean that's critical, and you can unless you're actually walking the talk, then people will look at you and will believe that you're false and you're only sprouting theory, but not actually putting it into practice. One of the things that I've found is it can be very difficult as a leader to understand what's truly going on within your organisation. And if as a leader you make yourself isolated, you're aloof, you're not open to communication, then you won't hear what's going on. One of the worst examples of that is when you shoot the messenger. So someone comes to you with bad news, and instead of taking that bad news, accepting it for what it is, and then doing something about it, you actually criticise the person who's bringing the news to you, and you reach down and punish people in the organisation. A good leader will open those lines of communication, will ensure that people are willing to come to them to talk to them about those issues, and a good leader will accept responsibility for that and work with the people they're leading to ensure that the issues are addressed. There's a lot of talk. You've probably heard the theory of management by walking around, and I know if I look back on some of my experiences, I think that people that I've led in the past would say that they would have liked me to do that more. I think that it is important that you make time and you actually get out and you talk to your people. You get down and you talk to the folks at all levels of the organisation, because that's the only way you're really going to know what's going on. You need to be your best always, because as a leader, you might be in a large organisation with thousands of people, or you might be in an organisation with 5 people. It doesn't matter. The way that you meet an individual, so you come across a person, say in the lift or out on a job site or something. For you, that's one more employee. For them, it's their opportunity to talk to the CEO or the chief operating officer or whatever position you are. and it becomes a very important engagement for them. So what it's important for you to realise is that you need to be there for them in that moment, so that they see the best of you, and also you're very much open to them to hear what it is that they've got to say, and there's an opportunity there to exhibit an emotional intelligence to understand what's going on in their lives. And with a small organisation, you try and get to know your people and get to know what's going on in their lives, because that's going to impact on their work lives. One of the best examples that I've seen of this was Peter Cosgrove in East Timor. When he was leading the interfet response, I was his engineer advisor. And he asked me one day to take him up to an engineer site where we had troops working. He was up in the hills above Dili. There'd been a landslip and a road had collapsed, partially collapsed. So we needed to rebuild that because it was one of the main supply routes between towns. We had a team of Australian and Kenyan engineers working up there. And so I took Cosy up in the Land Rover with his close personal protection party, at the front and the rear. And we arrived at the job site, and it was a typical Dili day. There'd been rain the night before, and it was steamy hot. And we stopped at the job site, and we were met there by two young lieutenants, junior officers, an Australian and a Kenyan. And they came up all prepared, ready to have a detailed discussion with Cosgrove about what was going on. And he said hello to them. He spoke to them for a few minutes, but then he said, "What's going on over there?" And he pointed to the side of the road. He said, "Take me over and show me what's going on there." So we went over to the edge and looked down. About 20 metres below, there was a group of soldiers, Kenyans and Aussies, working side by side, about 20 metres down from the road. And they were in mud, and they were filling Gabion baskets to try and build the road back up. So Cosgrove turned to me and to the young lieutenants, and he says, "How do I get down there? I want to go down there and talk to these fellas." So off he went, down the road, down the side, slipping and sliding as he went down. His close personal protection party were panicking because they were thinking, how are we going to protect him when he's down there? But down he went, and he spent the next 5 or 10 minutes talking to the soldiers, each of them, and spent time, tried to talk to every one of them. And every one of them afterwards talked about that day that the general came and saw them. So, it's really important that a leader remembers the impact that you have on your people, and that what might to you seem insignificant can be of major importance for them.
Yeah. No, I think that's what a great story, and what a great experience. But it's very true. I mean, such is the story in life, isn't it? We engage with each other and support each other, and know more than ever right now. Priscilla, one of the other findings is around setting reminders to follow through, and that's important in leadership, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but then you've got to action those comments or actions. What's your experience around following through and setting that example and then backing it up?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't follow up on your actions, it really undermines your how you're viewed as a leader among your team. So I do think it's really important to think about, the actions that you are setting for yourself, for them to be achievable, realistic, and then to make sure that you can follow through, because that will give your team a lot of confidence that, you're not making decisions just recklessly. You're really thinking it through, thinking about it strategically and what's in the best interest of the organisation. And I think the other part is also, really creating a safe space for your employees, giving them the freedom and the support to be innovative. Obviously, that's really important, and allowing them to feel that failure is okay and that it is okay to take risks. Fast fail approaches are really important. So if you can understand your team at an individual level, if you can really find out what they're passionate about and what motivates them, then often if you can get them in the right role, performance will follow. And that's why it's really important to, be there for your team, be one of the team as opposed to just barking down rules and commands. So that's more of my philosophy.
I think it's a good philosophy. And I'm going to ask you too about some of the leaders that you may have worked for in your career and the experience of working with great leaders, maybe some experience about working for not so great leaders. But I just want to say to everyone out there, now's your chance to ask the questions. We've got the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to ask any questions of our panel today, and I'll ask each of them as they come through. But Priscilla, as far as some great leaders you may have worked with, I'm sure you've got some stories.
Yeah, I do. I've worked for, let me say, great managers and not so great managers.
Okay.
I think being in a management position does not automatically mean that you're a leader. And there may be leaders who are very influential in your life that may not be in your reporting line. They might not even be in your company. So I think, when we're in the context of innovation, it is important to look for those role models and to spend the time, if there's a mentoring opportunity, or to see how they work and to learn from them. So yeah, when you find the good ones, they're definitely worth following.
Yeah. Here's some questions coming through, so keep them coming. This is to the panel. So from Jane, as a leader, is it better to warm call or cold call for team building, especially trying to find specific skills in that team? And the second question is there any key leadership lessons that have come out of the past 6 months? What a 6 months we've had. But is there any key leadership lessons that have come out of the past 6 months? I might cross to you on that one, Darren, because certainly just the ventilator project alone at AMGC, we had to help bring 30 local businesses together to build a supply chain to produce those ventilators. Yeah. And I think we're now up to about 1,000 of those ventilators being produced here in Australia, and we're going to make 2,000 of them. And thankfully, they're going to the medical stockpile. But certainly the leadership required to bring those companies together and then to put the plan around the manufacturing of those, it's been significant, right, mate?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of points that can be made there, Sharpie. And that ventilator project was a tremendous example of Australian companies coming together to respond to a need. I think the thing that I would say that's a lesson that's really being demonstrated at the moment through this COVID environment is the need for a calm and controlled leader in place. So, a leader needs to exert that image of being in control. Doesn't matter whether you are or not, but preferably you are. But even if you're not, you still need to try and demonstrate that image of being in control. And a lot of times that's what people need. When everything else is failing around them, and when the world is turning upside down compared to what is the norm, they want something that they can turn to, or someone that they can turn to provide them with confidence that someone's doing something about it. I might just talk a little bit about the 2015 floods up in the Hunter Valley. That was an event that happened in April of 2015, where the Hunter Valley and the Central Coast were hit by a massive storm, and there was a significant flooding and a lot of damage. And a lot of people were left homeless for periods of time. We lost power across the region for weeks on end in some instances. Communications were down. A lot of people were communicating simply by foot or listening to the local radio, and that was about it. They didn't have phones. They didn't have all of your normal means of communication. And I remember at the time Mike Baird was the Premier of New South Wales. He was very keen to try and give the impression that there was a plan in place, that everything was under control. While things were going awry at the time, there was a very capable organisation that was going to take the region through and come out the other end. And I think now you can probably think about what I'm saying in terms of COVID as well, but I'll keep on the Hunter Valley example just for the moment, if I might. One of the things that I've found in my experience is some technical experts make very good leaders, but not all technical experts are good leaders. And unfortunately, in a lot of industries and businesses, people get promoted into management positions because they're a good technical expert. And what you find then is there is a number of reasons why that can go wrong, but the main one is there tends to be a tendency towards micromanagement and towards lacking an ability to hand over control and responsibility to people within the team. And for a highly functioning team, what you need a leader who has built the team and has surrounded themselves with experts who are experts capable in their field, and then set a vision and empower those experts or those people who understand what the challenges are, empower them to get on and deal with it. And, as I've said to you before, Sharpie, it's, the leader's job is to set that vision, set the parameters, and then get out of the way. And let your people do what they're good at. But that doesn't mean hands off. You've got to stay in control. It's termed a loose rein. Keep a firm hold, but a loose rein.
Yeah.
And let your people do what they're doing. Check on where they're going. Encourage, support, and praise when they achieve what you're after. Now, the approach into the floods. What I was presented with there when I assumed the recovery coordinator role was we had something like 39 different agencies were working around the region trying to do what they did best, and that was everything from federal government agencies, state government, local government, non-government organisations, power companies, water supply companies, and so on. So all very clever, very capable in their own fields. So, it was very much apparent to me that I didn't need to be the expert in those areas. What I needed to do was try and coordinate what they were all doing and set a path for the recovery activities, which was what we did. And my role then was to be that face of recovery to the community. So I was coordinating and providing support to the teams who were doing the work on the ground. But then being available to community members. I was out and about. I tried to get out as much as I could around the communities and talk to people to understand what their issues were, and try and do something about it, and provide that calmness, provide that control, that image of control that people were looking for, and I found that worked very well for me. There were people who were dissatisfied. There's always going to be. But for the majority, I think you'd find that they realised that, it was going to take a little while, but at least there was a plan in place. There were capable people running it, and they could take confidence that they were being heard. And I guess my last point is just picking up on one of Priscilla's points about ensuring you follow through. Oftentimes, when I'd be out on the ground, I'd talk to people who'd lost their houses or something. Who knows what the issue might have been. You'd make promises to these people. It is imperative that you follow through on that, because the first time you don't, it becomes newsworthy. And all of a sudden your trust that you've built up with the community is lost. And for me, that was the community. But, if you think about it in a team sense, as soon as you fail to follow through on a promise, then that trust that the team relies on has been undermined, and it takes a long time then to rebuild it.
Well, Darren, that's good timing, because that's another part of our leadership part in the second way of the 10 Ways report. It says crafting a sense of us, and it's so important in that team building. So you're exactly right. We've got a lot of questions coming through, guys. So I'm going to combine some of these here if I can. I'm going to ask the first one to Garry, but I'm combining the questions. So let's ask Priscilla how about she is building leadership capability in her company as the company grows. But the question for the panel is, if the panel can each share one life example of the difference between a manager and a leader that they've seen exhibited or they've seen over their career. So maybe Garry, if you wanted to start on something around what do you see or what have you recognised over the time between a manager and a leader? What's the difference?
Well, the manager is the doer, and the leader is the guy who leads the way. But we've had 3 generations of family businesses coming through this place that started off probably as truck drivers, mattress makers, then graduated into the office, and then moved on into innovation, kept on upskilling themselves and learning more and more and more of what they can provide for the business. But the difference between a manager and a leader is that we have seen it happen on the basis that without giving them the skills to understand what we expect of them as a leader, we wouldn't have got the results we have got to get us through COVID. We started our trainee program on leadership and integrity and values 2 years ago. That was initiated by our CEO to bring our people through as leaders of the business. And you need leaders. You don't just need one leader with the size of our business. You need leaders that are all on the same wavelength and that all understand that comments that are made are not personal. It's comments are helping to build their character, helping to build their understanding of what the expectation of the business is. So building leaders is something we focus on very much. And we've seen young people come through and really prove to be great leaders. And also, as Darren was saying, we've had an open door policy since 120 years, and that we've had not one strike in 120 years. And that communication with the people is very important. And to see young guys and young women come through and grow into better people and then leave the business is also a great thank you, I suppose, for ourselves as a company and as a family, that they take those things and move on. So, yeah,
Well,
managers to leaders, some
I think
don't.
that's a good point too, Gary, because in very bold letters here on the report, it says that people need the visual of what to do before they start doing it. And you need to transition from being a professional enthusiast to an enthusiastic professional leader. And I think that's what you were saying there. And obviously I agree. But Priscilla, back to that question for you was around how are you going about building the leadership capability at DOFTEK now? And for those who haven't had the chance to look at the website, I strongly encourage you to look at the technology that Priscilla and her company are developing in the automotive sector. It's world class, world first.
I was going to say, don't do it yet, because that is a job that I have to do to improve the website. So maybe just give me a week. But yeah, it's really simple. I think about this really simply. I mean, leaders have followers. You don't need to have a team formally reporting to you to be a leader. I think that, you know, for us in DOFTEK as a startup, pre-revenue company, there's really 2 things that will make us successful. Great product being one of them, but great team. And if you don't have great team, doesn't matter how great your product is. So it's absolutely critical. Because we're a small team, we're actually right now going through the exercise of identifying first, what are our skills gap? Understanding and looking at ourselves and what expertise that we have, and frankly, what expertise we don't have. So we are looking at scaling our team and bringing on more people. In terms of our leadership approach, I mean, it's really very similar to what Darren expressed earlier. It's about, you know, defining the responsibility and empowering and trusting them to execute and to be successful. I really believe that a leader or a manager is successful when you make yourself redundant. So that's the key, giving them the scope and trusting them.
Yeah, all good points. We've got so many questions coming through. I've got here one from Ash, and this I think will be for you, Darren. And also you might want to touch on, I asked Priscilla earlier around any books or podcasts or things that she might learn from, and I'm going to ask the same question of you. But to start with, a question from Ash is that often when people think about leadership, they look at the executive team. But you can lead from the middle and incorporate your personal values within that organisation culture. What are your views on this? And in your opinion, how can a middle manager lead? I guess you may have seen that in the troops over the time, right?
Yeah, well, you know, leadership doesn't always or shouldn't just rest at the senior executive. It needs to be all the way through the organisation. And if I take the military as an example, you've got a very hierarchical structure, but at every level, people are expected to lead, and they are trained to lead. And just on your point about books, I mean, there's a multitude of books out there on leadership. But what I've found is if you want to go back to some fairly straight shooting discussion about what leadership is, then search some of them. Go on Google and look at the Australian Army leadership approach, and there's a fair bit of information up there, a lot of commentary online about how the Australian Army approaches leadership. It's been pretty much consistent for years, but it gets tweaked according to the times. And one of the things that the Army has always said is that it differentiates between command, leadership, and management. And command is the authority that you get through your position or through your rank. So in a private sector context, that's a member of the executive board or someone in a position of authority. A manager is someone who controls and organises, and I've seen it said simply: leaders lead people and managers manage things. And I think that's probably a little simplistic, but the Army looks at it as managing is to do with people, but it's also to do with things, and it's about controlling and organising and looking after people's welfare and so on. But leadership is the key one, which is very much focused on the individuals. And as both of our other panelists have said, it's about inspiring. It's about setting a vision. It's about then bringing people along with you. And I think it was Eisenhower who said, leadership is the art of getting someone to do something because they want to. And it's that because they want to is the thing about leadership. Now, you need that at every level, because in an organisation, the executive will set direction and so on for the organisation as a whole. But then through your various branches and divisions and so on within that organisation, there's going to be different objectives. There's going to be different outcomes that are not necessarily, well, they shouldn't be out of alignment with the overall organisational objective, but they will be different because they'll be looking at more detailed outcomes. So I think there is a very real need for leadership down at those levels, because if you can't motivate the person who is at the bottom of that chain of command, then you're not going to get anywhere. Because ultimately, in the military context, it all boils down to what the soldier in the trench does, yeah. And the way that the message gets down to him or her is through the chain of command, through leadership at all levels.
Yep.
How do you inspire it? Well, you give people the ability to lead. So you teach them, and Garry was talking about some of the training programs that A.H Beard does, which I'm really pleased to hear. So you train people, you encourage them to ask questions, you encourage them to take risks, but they need to, you obviously need to put bounds around that. But then if they take a risk and it's with the right intention and it's aligned with organisational objectives, and it goes awry, don't crucify them for it, but support them, work through why, and try and learn how to make it better the next time. What that does is that encourages that attitude of working together. It encourages team building. It encourages people to be willing to communicate up and down the chain. The final thing I would say is when it comes to a leader, take accountability and responsibility for what happens, but pass the praise down. So, I always took the attitude was if there was a kick in the backside deserved, it stopped at me. And it was then work with the team to work out how to address it, make sure that whatever it was that went wrong is addressed for the future. But when it comes to praise, always have sloping shoulders and pass that praise right down to the lowest level where it needs to be, because ultimately without those people doing the right thing, the organisation won't get to where it needs to go.
Yeah. It's been great being able to talk with Garry over the last few months around some of the issues that we all have had to deal with the crisis. But there's so many questions coming through. This one is for you, Garry, and then I'll ask Priscilla this as well, a question. Garry, I'm interested in the family business side of things and what you did for subsequent generations in and around learning the business and formal training prior to entering a senior role. How did you go about that? And Priscilla, your question is going to be around how have you struck the balance between giving the team freedom? Oh, this is for everyone, but Priscilla, you might like to answer this. The balance and freedom of the team to innovate and experiment and the potential for the loss or impact. How do you deal with that in a practical sense? But for you, Garry, the family side of things. So many of our companies are family generational business in across Australian manufacturing. What's been the experience there?
The best experience and the best learnings that I have had personally and the family have had personally is getting involved with what they call Family Business Australia, and that we joined up with them back in '99, and I would say without the learnings I have had from them, our company would not be as big and as strong as what it is today without that involvement. And that the question re the next generation, that we have what we call the next gen there, that you have an opportunity for the next geners to talk amongst family businesses and hear and vent their concerns and understanding, and also get them into a situation that to be open with mum and dad, I suppose what it comes down to, of what they want to achieve. And we as a family, my brother, myself and my sisters, asked of any siblings that wanted to join the business to at least go outside of the business and get experience before coming into the business, work for another boss, get some other credentials for yourself. Eldest daughter a teacher and ended up in our education. Eldest son a Sparky, ended up in operations. Another son who's a musician, who at the present moment is suffering very much under COVID, but he works out in trucks occasionally, and the youngest daughter in education. All went outside of the business before they came into the business. But it also becomes a bit of a, what's the right word, a bit of weight on their shoulders when they join the business, because they're expected to keep on learning. And that's just because they got the name, it doesn't give them the privilege to move through the business, and that the expectation that they need be a bit more than our other people to really learn and grow within the business is a very important part with the next generation coming in.
Well, I think you touched on some good things there, Garry, around Family Business Australia. Certainly a great resource, and I've had the privilege to be involved with the organisation over many years, but also our Manufacturing Academy. It's been a great platform since we launched it late last year, and having a range of manufacturers all across Australia sharing their experience on the Manufacturing Academy is a great resource, and I highly commend it to all of you out there to have a look at the Academy website. And we've got to get through some quick questions and answers here, I guess. Priscilla, so back to you around the balance, striking a balance between giving the team freedom to experiment and innovate, but with the potential for loss and the impact. How do you deal with that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the question really is, what is the risk if you don't create the space? So I think it's really important for you as leaders, as managers, as company to really decide what is your risk appetite around innovation? What are you willing to invest in terms of resources, in terms of time? What I do know is if you do decide that innovation is important to you, and to be honest, I think it's really, really important to all companies, then to be super protective of creating that space for your employees to innovate. So that means, no last minute requests, off the email, maybe you're working from home on a Friday in a space where you can be creative. But if you don't protect that, life's other pressures will slowly creep in and destroy that anyway. So decide your risk appetite, stick to it, and hopefully you will reach the reward, because again, there's the risk reward ratio, cost benefit analysis. You just really have to look at that and understand what you're prepared to give for the benefits.
There you go. I think this has been a tremendous session. I'm so grateful you could all join me here today. And here I am in the mobile Zoom studio, but it's certainly a new world we're all entering in. I'm going to ask a final question, and it's about your own leadership style. If you could perhaps give me one word about your own leadership style as you see it, but also I'm stitching in the last question here is around how can you lead and influence outside your own organisations to help industry grow, particularly in regional Australia. So maybe start with you, Darren. How would you describe your own leadership style, and how can we, I guess it's collaboration, right? Sharing with others our networks and experience.
Yeah, well, you've actually taken it. I mean, it's collaboration or consultative, but you know what you've got to remember is you can do that, but ultimately, as the leader, it's your decision, and you've got to take ownership of that. So consult all you want, collaborate all you want, but ultimately you need to own the decision. And you know, if you're able to bring the organisation along with you, even better. Where the team owns the decision, then that's fantastic.
Great. And for you, Garry?
Collaboration, definitely, and caring, and really making sure that the people do know that you care about them. They're just not just a number. They're an integral part of the business, and they play an important role, whether it's loading the bed on the truck or selling the bed to Burke or calling at Mount Isa to sell a bed. They all have a understanding of we do care. And
Priscilla?
Yeah, for me, I think I'm really passionate about servant leadership. I think being a leader is a privilege, and you know, I'm really passionate about bringing up others and making them the best that they can be, and creating opportunities for them to be successful.
That's great. We're going to put some slides up now to talk about next week's way 3 of our 10 Ways report. And so while those slides are coming up, here we go. How to be a leader who encourages innovation. And so I'd again encourage all of you to download the 10 Ways report from the AMGC website, and you can read it and see what's going on or what's coming over the coming weeks. We've got such a terrific range of speakers going to join me, and I'm really excited about all that we've got ahead. So keep learning. This is today's, remind yourself of the ability to make change. We talked about crafting a sense of us and leading by example. We all spoke about that. So demonstrating behaviours you would like to see in your employees. Set reminders to follow through. You know, Priscilla touched on that. And everyone talked about engaging in collaboration. So for those of you who haven't joined AMGC, it's completely free. I encourage you to join, be involved with our growing network right across the nation. Check out Manufacturing Academy, log in and learn. It's a terrific platform with some great experience, and you can hear and learn from some great industry leaders. And the COVID-19 Manufacturers Response Register, it's just going from strength to strength each and every week. People engaging on that platform that are needing PPE, whether it be hand sanitizer or face masks or emergency hospital beds or ventilators, whatever the need might be, you can get onto that register, put in your needs and be connected with local industry. So here's an overview of the 10 Ways report. Today we've done the focus on leadership, the second way. And so we're looking forward to next week. Again, engage with all these various ways in the 10 Ways report, which you can download from our website. So can I again thank all of our speakers for joining me today. Great to catch up with you all. And feel free to email AMGC, connect with all of us on LinkedIn, and we'll be able to engage with you at any time. Look forward to continued discussion. Thank you all.
Cheers.